Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're just going to give it another minute or so to get situated and have everyone join. All right. Well, I think we can go ahead and get started for the sake of time. Thank you all so much for joining this afternoon for a conversation on opportunities to promote job quality and grow an inclusive clean energy workforce. My name is Grace Lowe. I'm a program manager at NASEO, and I'm joined by our partner, Maya Goodwin, who is a senior manager for workforce policy and research at the Markle Foundation. Right. And for our agenda today, we are first going to provide a little context on the goals and format of the Markle NASEO State Clean Energy Workforce Initiative. And then Maya will talk through some of the key learnings from the initiative, as well as a framework for state action. And then we're really excited to have a panel discussion with state energy office leaders. So we're really grateful to have Carrie Campbell from Pennsylvania and Michelle Butler from Colorado. To talk through their experience participating in the initiative, as well as some of the work that they're doing on clean energy workforce in their states. And then finally, we'll have some time for audience discussion, as well as a Zoom poll. So just a few quick Zoom reminders. We are recording this meeting, and we'll post the slides and recording on NASEO's website later this week. We hope this will be more of a discussion-based meeting, so feel free to ask questions in the chat or raise your Zoom hand to unmute. But otherwise, we ask that you keep yourself on mute so that everyone can hear the speakers. So with that, I will just start by providing a little bit of background on this initiative. Markle and the NASEO Foundation launched this initiative in 2022 with three goals. First, to promote connections and coordination between clean energy and workforce policymakers in order to grow opportunities in and access to good jobs. And second, to identify and elevate challenges that state energy offices and workforce development agencies are facing. And then finally, to develop a resource where we could share best practices and challenges and outline some of these opportunities for action. So the format for the initiative kind of took on three different areas. First, we had individual state discussions where we convened teams of energy and workforce leaders in 3 states to share perspectives, identify priorities, and discuss potential solutions. And then we also, the Markle Foundation and the Eno Center for Transportation held similar conversations focused on transportation workforce issues in 3 other states. And the second piece was these broader webinars where we shared topics of common interest and lifted up examples and models from other states. And then finally, as I mentioned, we developed this comprehensive resource with input from state energy and workforce leaders in order to highlight some of these opportunities, share key lessons from the initiative, and offer strategies to build an inclusive workforce and prioritize job quality. So part of the motivation for this initiative was the scale of funding in the recent federal legislation, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, as well as the Inflation Reduction Act. And these pots of funding for workforce are kind of spread out across a number of different provisions and sections of the legislation. So I think it helps to break it down into 2 main categories. The first is opportunities to augment clean energy workforce programs and services through direct spending. And then the second is to prioritize job quality, inclusion, and accountability through general state's clean energy spending. And within this first bucket, IIJA has a number of programs, I think, that are important to note. So the Energy Auditor Training Program, there's also $550 million as part of the Weatherization Assistance Program that's dedicated for technical assistance and training. And then some flexible dollars within the U.S. State Energy Program and the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant Program. And then as well within the Inflation Reduction Act, or the IRA, There's $200 million for contractor training grants to carry out training programs for contractors implementing the home rebate programs. And then within that second bucket, it's a little less straightforward, but I think has a lot of potential for states to really start investing in and prioritizing workforce development. So there are a number of competitive funding opportunities, such as the regional clean hydrogen hubs, where states are encouraged and can win more points in their bids for incorporating workforce development, equity, and job quality through those community benefit plans. And then within the Inflation Reduction Act, there are also programs like the HOMES and the HERA program, where states can choose to incorporate some of those criteria and preferences in their own spending. And then one other aspect of the federal funding is the tax incentives, which are a huge piece, and I think will create a lot of new jobs and a lot of opportunity to invest in workforce development. So in order to receive the full tax benefit for many of these tax credits, the taxpayer has to comply with prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements, which is a big opportunity for states to start investing in these programs and support broader pathways to apprenticeship and pre-apprenticeship programs. So with that, I will pass it over to Maya to talk through some of the lessons we took away from this initiative, as well as the framework for action.
Thanks, Grace. It's wonderful to be with you all today. As Grace mentioned, my name is Maya Goodwin. I lead federal and state workforce policy initiatives at the Markle Foundation. For those that are unfamiliar with Markle, we are an operational foundation focused on expanding access to good quality employment for all people in the U.S. with an emphasis on workers without a bachelor's degree. For those that may not be aware, the majority of jobs in infrastructure will likely be able, over the next decade, will likely be obtainable for workers without a bachelor's degree, given current and recent trends. It has been incredible, to say the least, to partner with NASEO as well as the Eno Center for Transportation in the effort that Grace detailed. As Grace mentioned, a key goal of the convening of state energy, transportation, and workforce leaders was to learn directly from state decision makers in positions to influence the ways that energy and transportation funds are spent in relation to job quality and workforce. We designed these convenings of state leaders to get a detailed understanding of how state energy and workforce agencies think about influencing their own spending to affect the quality of jobs that are created in the clean energy sector, especially at a time of unprecedented levels of clean energy investment. When I say prioritize the quality of jobs that are created, we are focusing on good quality jobs. By that, I mean jobs that pay a family-sustaining wage, that have essential benefits and a fair opportunity to join a union, jobs that are free from harassment and discrimination on the work site, and that come with skills building and career advancement opportunities. By inclusive access to those jobs, I am referring to realizing a system where key actors take intentional action to improve gender, racial, and other forms of diversity in the clean energy workforce. So the engagement with states that Grace mentioned informed the report that was released last month. One of, if not the main value adds of this report in our minds, is what we have termed a framework for state action to prioritize job quality and inclusive workforce practices. This framework applies to clean energy, it applies to transportation and other infrastructure sectors, but I will discuss just clean energy today, as that's why we've all gathered for this webinar. This framework is really intended to help states navigate the most opportune ways to use their energy investments to support workforce goals. We boiled down the key strategies across 3 equally important areas that you can see here. Grace, could we go to the next slide? So the first is to deepen cross-agency coordination between, in this case, an energy office or other agency involved in energy and environment work with workforce agencies to align workforce investments with jobs. This includes such actions as developing a memorandum of understanding between an energy office and a workforce agency to identify shared goals and ways that agencies would share data, funding, or otherwise work together. I tend to bring up MOUs a lot because even us in our initiative with both states in conversation about transportation and about clean energy, there were a number of instances where key actors, key staffers left. Turnover is something that does affect this work. And so memorandums of understanding, even while difficult to put together, can help that kind of work outlive just individual staffers. Another example in this area is to include create dedicated staff to focus on clean energy, workforce, and education investments. A lot of times there isn't someone whose role is really to focus on workforce in clean energy work. And for instance, who is going to navigate where there are those funding opportunities that Grace mentioned and work with other stakeholders to develop a plan to use those flexibilities. Could we go to the next slide? The second area in this framework is what we've termed augment workforce program funding. By this, we mean using direct expenditures and grants to boost workforce recruitment, training, and wraparound supports. This area of state action is typically where most people think all the workforce investment happens. And we wanted, in part to have this three-part framework to differentiate these other actions that you could do. It's not just about investing in pre-apprenticeship or registered apprenticeship programs. It's also about these other areas that complement those direct expenditures. Could we go to the next one? And then the third is to embed job quality, inclusion, and accountability through state spending on infrastructure. We refer to this as embedding into procurement. This is one where we've seen numerous federal agencies take action related to infrastructure funds recently by embedding workforce and job quality priorities into their discretionary grants. For instance, as most people here are probably aware, the Department of Energy requires community benefit plans to accompany all agency funding opportunities. And part of this is about plans to build inclusive paths to the workforce of the projects that the funding will support. We've also seen states use this strategy and detail many examples in the report, but in nearly all cases, it's worth mentioning that this strategy has been accompanied by state legislation, as in legislation that gives explicit authority or directive to the agency to, for instance, use local or economic hire preferences in a project, to use project labor agreements, or to use apprenticeship utilization requirements. Something I want to call out about this strategy is that there are really many options for states in this category, and we have tried to not be exhaustive, but the point is simply that as spending agencies, we believe there's an opportunity to influence the quality of the jobs and support inclusive access to those jobs through putting terms and preferences into spending. And I think now is a great time to explore what is possible at the state level in this strategy. Can we go to the next slide? So I'd like to quickly address a foundational concept for the framework for state action, and that is the idea that aligning supply of labor investments, such as training and recruitment, with demand for that labor is something that states should strive to do, and that is built into these three complementary strategies. So there are three major advantages that I want to raise around what comes from aligning supply of labor with demand for that labor. So one is that alignment can leverage the existing capacities of the state to support workforce development programs and services to meet the workforce needs at scale. Having coordination with the workforce development agency and the education system would be, we think, critical to building sufficient paths to support a workforce to meet the needs of projects at the level that IIJA and IRA will create. A second and a really important one is that such a strategy prioritizes intentionally opening doors for qualified workers from underrepresented demographic groups to join and succeed in infrastructure sectors. So there's a number of ways that demand strategies can help to not just can help to make trained and qualified workers actually connect to those jobs. For instance, we've seen in Illinois that the state, in relation to all of its public works investment, has incentives for contractors and subcontractors to hire and retain graduates of recognized pre-apprenticeship programs. So in addition to the state supporting pre-apprenticeship programs, they create those demand investments for those workers by having a financial incentive for the contractors to actually hire and retain from those programs. Another way to do this, another example would be to, in spending, require or incentivize contractors to partner with community-based groups, workforce intermediaries, unions, or others to open doors to their jobs and to show that there's a partnership there. And then the third advantage that I want to call out is that this alignment helps to make workforce investments a more productive investment of public and individual resources. Going back to pre-apprenticeship, having alignment between pre-apprenticeship with registered apprenticeship program slots is a real opportunity here. Why would we invest in pre-apprenticeship only for workers to come out of the program and not necessarily have sufficient registered apprenticeship slots in their community or slots that are open at that time? By aligning the terms of the actual project to incentivize registered apprenticeship slots through apprenticeship utilization, or to incentivize connection with for those programs with pre-apprenticeship providers, that's a way to have alignment there. And this principle also applies to other trainings and other earn and learn programs. Could we go to the next slide? So this slide detailed on the left some of the key learnings that we gained from the engagement with states around transportation and clean energy. They're discussed on page 19 of the report, but just for sake of time, I'll just say that the first learning was really that there's immense opportunity, truly more than we had even anticipated in going into this work, for state agencies to formalize partnership and kickstart coordination to build on existing capacities in the state. The second is that prioritization of workforce development and job quality in infrastructure implementation is in many cases a significant shift from the status quo work. And the third is that while there's a lot of interest, I think, in embedding workforce inclusion and job quality standards into the terms of spending, there's a lot of complex questions. There will be a lot of work involved in charting a path forward, but there is a lot of opportunity there and a great deal of interest. Could we go to the next slide? So with that, I'll kick it back to Grace to introduce our panelists.
Great, thanks so much, Maya. All right, so now we're going to shift into the panel discussion with Carrie and Michelle. Carrie Campbell is the Environmental Program Manager for the Energy Programs Office at the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection, and Michelle is the Senior Engagement Manager for the Weatherization Assistance Program at the Colorado Energy Office. So just to kick things off, maybe we can start with you, Carrie, and if you could just share some of the ways that your office has or is supporting clean energy workforce development and job quality in the clean energy sector, and then a few of the lessons or changes that you've gained after participating in this initiative.
Okay, well, that's a lot. Initially, I just want to say, we are the State Energy Office in Pennsylvania, but we're within the Department of Environmental Protection. And so our goals are always environmental protection related, as opposed to some other state energy offices are more about economic development or some other priorities, right? So our areas of emphasis are renewable energy, energy efficiency, and conservation, which is most state energy offices do, but also we run the state's climate program, and we're responsible for energy security and alternative transportation programs as well. We don't run the weatherization program, the LIHEAP program, or utility programs, so we don't have that workforce aspect that some of the other agencies do. But we do work with a lot of partners to implement and coordinate and facilitate clean energy programs. While not a workforce agency, we realized back in the U.S. energy employment reports that there was going to be significant employment potential in clean energy, and there was going to be more. It's been constantly growing. And then IRA and IIJA hit, and we realized that those programs were really going to expand the potential for clean energy workforce. So we started working, we did some studies using the consultant who did the US EAR study, BW Research. They looked at, over 90,000 clean energy jobs in Pennsylvania already growing, and made some recommendations for things like on-the-job training and apprenticeship training, things like that. So we shared those reports with our Department of Labor and Industry here, who is the state's workforce agency. And one of the things that has come out of that is they developed a clean energy workforce grants in 2002. There are 4 grants in 11 different local areas, encountering a number of counties in Pennsylvania, including urban and rural counties. $2 million total awarded to those local workforce development boards and partners to really connect clean energy employers with new job seekers. So we found that to be really, really helpful. There's monthly meetings. They have specific deliverables they need to do as part of those grants. They need to connect up with, it's really about using existing workforce tools to highlight clean energy opportunities and connect potential employees with employers. So that's been a really good program. Just started really and back in September. So it's things are working on that regard. Also, we well, I have some other things to talk about later, but we've been engaging in some workforce forever, but it's really more about, as I say, training old dogs, new tricks. So it's about training workers who are already doing work in the energy field or in building management field and training energy efficiency tools. So it's only the last couple of years we've started to pay a little bit more attention to how to get new employees and new entrants into the workforce. I think I'll leave it there for now.
Thanks, Carrie. And Michelle, turning to you, would you mind just sharing a bit about what the Colorado Energy Office is doing on clean energy workforce development and some lessons that you took away from this initiative?
Sure. First, thank you very much for inviting me to participate here. I kind of want to preface everything I have to say with the reality that we're still kind of beginning all of the things that I'm about to talk about. So I don't necessarily have any kind of concrete results or statistics to share, but a lot of optimism. And so, yeah, I will. So I am the engagement manager in the Weatherization Assistance Program, which is housed in the Energy Office. And the Energy Office in Colorado is part of the Governor's Office. And so the Energy Office is composed of a number of different departments, weatherization, but also transportation, buildings, strategic innovations in finance, et cetera. So there, and that encompass all of these sort of like innovative energy efforts that the Colorado is looking at as we sort of move towards this energy transition. I started participating in this collaboration with NASEO and Markle right at the beginning of my tenure in the Energy Office. And so I was kind of thrown into something that I originally didn't necessarily understand why there were so many silos. It would seem to make sense that, as we start developing new programs for new clean energy, that we would be constantly thinking about the workforce that was going to be needed to implement all of that. But it was surprising that hadn't been something that was front of mind for most of the different teams in the energy office. It had been for weatherization and the energy efficiency industry. That's just been, I think, workforce has been consistently an issue, simply because of the nature of the work in general, but also that we do so much, so all the time, that we really need to build up that workforce. And so it was really interesting for me to participate, and I think also I think it was really fortuitous that I didn't have this kind of already built-in siloing, and that it was something that I was able to use to the advantage of the project in general, because I didn't come with those kind of preconceived kind of separations. But in the end, I think we've, at the end of that collaboration, at the end of the sort of discussions that we were having, we have been able to build relationships with our workforce counterparts at the state level that I think will transcend even staffers. Though I do agree with Maya that I do think some kind of formal agreement would be really critical to continuing this work, not just in this moment of all of this federal funding coming down and all of these opportunities, but these are going to be perennial problems. And if we can create these relationships that transcend individual staffers, I think it would be certainly beneficial. I think of all the work that we have done as individuals and as a team to build these relationships with folks in, our counterparts at the Colorado Department of Labor and Employment and the Colorado Workforce Development Council, and that if, any of us were to leave, what would happen to those relationships. So that's a lesson that I think I'm starting to really appreciate right now. And just because the relationships that we have been able to build with our counterparts have been and continue to be very productive in ways that I think are going to really benefit our efforts. Our office in general has recognized as well that workforce development is a really vital aspect of the energy transition, so much so that they've created and staffed a climate workforce development manager position for the office. That's not me. This person has just started, so they're in the onboarding phase right now. But it does demonstrate the recognition that I think a lot had to do with this collaboration with NASEO and Markle, that at least a full-time employee is necessary to move the needle around workforce development, with always paying attention to these issues of job quality as well. We have counterparts in the Gov's office, the governor's office, that are there supporting us. We've even, we're contracting with a national organization to support our design and deployment of the IRA and IHA funds, especially around the rebates. And they're also dedicating time to, helping us understand workforce development in Colorado, what the needs are, what the gaps are. So this has been really great. This is relatively new. And so that's been really, that's been something important for us moving forward, a huge support for our workforce development manager. And yeah, I feel like there's a lot of lessons that we've learned throughout this process. And I'll leave it there. I think I was only supposed to do 5 minutes. I went way over, so.
All good. Thanks, Michelle and Carrie. And Maya, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks. So I think both Carrie and Michelle, you touched on some of this a bit in your remarks, but are there particular aspects of IIJA and IRA or the work that your offices are doing now related to workforce that you're most excited about? And by that, in that same way, are there particular challenges that you think are most pronounced from your perspective in terms of the energy office supporting workforce?
Well, I think with the IIJA funding, we are excited to kind of collaborate with our workforce counterparts to apply for the energy audit training funds that are available. The weatherization assistance funds that are coming down, we're already working with that. We've, again, in the weatherization assistance program, we've been able to allocate funds to each of our sub-grantees that perform the weatherization services across the state, enough funding to support a full-time workforce development manager just for them in their regions, right? And so this, this is something that we're also really excited. They're a little daunted by, right? But we're really excited about, and then collaborating with our workforce development manager at the state level, we're hoping to see the fruits of this over the next few months. We're also pretty excited about what may happen with the contractor training guidance that's about to come down. I know that a lot of folks have been really open about the challenges there for training contractors, but also making sure that those contractors are providing quality jobs for the folks who are doing the work on the ground. So I think that's one thing we're excited about, but also, kind of see as potentially a challenge. And again, we are also one of those states that sees procurement, sort of the questions of procurement and embedding job quality in our procurement practices as potentially a challenge as well. Again, it's just sort of, we really have to be innovative and open-minded and willing to kind of see how far we can move the line here in order to, include in preferences, incentives, et cetera, for bringing in more minority and women-owned businesses into our procurement practices, et cetera. And we have a great team that's actually working on it. I would say absolutely because of this collaboration and us kind of just like hounding them. And so that's been a benefit for us. We're a mid-sized, I think, energy office. We're not too big. We're not big, huge, we're not California size, but we're not little either. So we still have those options for, reaching out and really, trying to build those relationships with the different teams. But I'll leave it there. Terry?
Yeah, I think obviously, as you said, you talked about the energy audit funds that are energy auditor training funds that are coming down. We're interested in that as well. When that opens up, we certainly will apply to that. We have a pretty good partnership with we have sort of a statewide community college. It's Penn College, Pennsylvania College of Technology. They're like a community college, but they're affiliated with the state, Penn State University, and do training statewide. And they're the folks who are contracted with the weatherization assistance program as well to do their training. So we keep in touch with our weatherization people, which are in a completely different agency. They're with the Economic Development and Community Agency, interestingly. And so, we've done other work with them in the past and have periodic calls, and we hope to work with them specifically on the energy audit training grants. And we don't know, right? We don't know what the contractor training guidance is going to look like. Is that going to be, how much of that's going to be formula, how much of it's going to be competitive, and we're interested in that. But some of the other, there may be other opportunities for workforce training or workforce development or research around workforce through some of the other programs. So one of the things we did or in the process of applying to the Resilient and Efficient Codes Implementation Grant Program to do some workforce training, because energy codes inspectors, at least in Pennsylvania, the median age is pretty much retirement age. And so we expect that we're going to need a lot more codes inspectors, codes enforcement officers, folks in local government who understand building codes. And so we're hoping to develop a codes training program that reaches down into high school and work with career technical CTE schools that have VOTEC or career technical education programs to sort of start a little pipeline for those sorts of energy workers. That was not a workforce program, right? It was a codes program. But one of the biggest challenges I think we're going to have to implementing resilient and efficient building codes is really just the workforce to do it. So kind of interesting to see what other opportunities there are for these things. And on the other end, a lot of the programs that we're engaged in, state energy program, grid resilience programs, EECBG, revolving loan fund, maybe charging and fueling infrastructure discretionary grants, and some of the other programs, on the IRA programs, we're going to work with our air quality folks to apply for the climate pollution reduction grants program too, which is going to result in deployments of projects that are going to need people to hire. So, and the rebates, obviously the whole home and efficiency electrification rebates programs are going to be big to get people working. So I really think the biggest challenge though, the thing that I'm most concerned about is really capacity. I've kind of been the guy in our office who focuses on workforce, really just because everyone else is too busy, and so am I. So who's going to be who can coordinate this? It's not, so it's a little bit catch as catch can. I think it's a good idea. I like your idea of hiring a full-time climate workforce development position. And we're coming up with our plan for the climate pollution reduction grants. We need to put our planning grants together. So maybe that's a good idea.
I would say, that's what happened with myself and my other partners at the energy office in this collaboration. This wasn't our workforce, wasn't our job, right? It wasn't even something that was written into our job descriptions. We actually did have somebody that left, I think, that was kind of looking at workforce, but again, really, 25% of our time. And so we just realized too, what a challenge this is and what an opportunity it is, right? So we were able to, our office engaged in an office-wide sort of strategic meeting, and, from the governor's office and from other, sort of voices kept hearing over and over again, how are we going to do the workforce? How are we going to build this workforce? And it was just, we got leadership buy-in to create this position. And, it's a grant funded position. So we'll see what happens in the next 5 years. Right. But yeah, I think it's really going to make the difference at the state level. And so I encourage all state energy offices, if they have that opportunity, to consider that.
So I have a request. If you can share that position description with me, I would love that. Like, what does that look like?
Absolutely. I'm happy to share it with everybody. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think that would be great if you could share that and Grace could share that out, as that can be helpful in making it happen. And if you have information about which grant supported the funding too, that could be good context. So this conversation about the importance of having dedicated staff to think about and coordinate what is so much work involved in making workforce and job quality a priority in energy office spending and activities that we've heard. There's reason that you would emphasize this, but are there other strategies or other advice that you would emphasize for state energy offices that are also working on this challenge? And what would you really raise as important for a state energy office to do in supporting the clean energy workforce in their state?
Well, I would say definitely connect with your workforce development councils, local, state, regional. That has made all of the difference. They have the resources, they have the expertise to help you kind of navigate what is really a quality job. What is the demographic in that particular region, right? We have focused our workforce development on what Colorado is defining as disproportionately impacted communities, right? Really similar to the disadvantaged communities by the federal government definition. And, you know, without the support of our Workforce Development Council counterparts, I don't think we would have really been able to identify where do those communities, where do they exist, right? What are really good ways of building relationships with them? Who are the organizations within those communities that we can reach out to, right? That really can help us understand what the needs and priorities are of those communities. That's been a really important part of that relationship with our workforce development folks at the state level. I would also say, you know, don't be afraid of things like registered apprenticeships. You can start small and grow them. Your workforce development folks should have all the information and support necessary to get those started, especially with your industry counterparts. You know, registered apprenticeship doesn't make sense at the state level necessarily in the energy office, right? But, you know, for weatherization, this is something that we've started doing with our agencies as a result, you know, just this year. And we're hoping that this helps attract candidates that want to stay in the industry and grow in this industry. What the apprenticeships and other sorts of resources, for example, at the state level, we might have a lot of money to kind of throw at workforce development, but we have a lot of restrictions too. And one of those big restrictions is those wraparound and support services. So your workforce development counterparts can help you identify where can we access those funds as well, so that we can encourage and bolster our workforce with underrepresented demographics like women and minorities. And so that's been something that we think is really valuable too, that Colorado's been working on.
Yeah, that's really good. I think I agree. Those partnerships with the other agencies have been really helpful to the degree we've been able to connect. As I said, we turned our study, our gap analysis study cost us less than $50,000. And we shared that information with our Department of Labor and Industry, and they created a $2 million grant program with their funds, in part based on this report and the data that we had. So in addition to those connections, you know, connect with your training people, connect with your other agencies and local where you have the opportunity to do that. I also think, as I talked about the data and the reports, I think it's important if people aren't yet getting it in your states, that looking at the U.S. Energy Employment Report, or maybe getting sort of cuts of those reports for your state, or maybe even just getting some data on really where are the jobs, how many jobs could there be as a result of these programs, which we haven't done that yet, and where are those jobs likely to happen, and what are the gaps in getting people into those jobs. I think any sort of data that you can provide is helpful. So it may be worth getting with a contractor who can, if you don't have that access to that data, find someone who can help you get that information, because I think that's it's telling, right? It goes from you know, why should we be interested in this, to holy cow, how are we going to find the people to do this work? And it's really I think when the workforce development people kind of get that, you know, because I don't know, we're a fossil fuel state here, right? So people think energy jobs are coal mining and gas drilling and, you know, pipeline building, and that's what they think of as energy jobs. And so when you show how many, there's more energy efficiency jobs than any of the other categories in this report. Wow, that's interesting. So again, getting the data out in front of people, I think, is helpful.
I would also add too that, you know, at least in Colorado, the Workforce Development Council and the Department of Labor and Employment, they also are the ones that have the relationships with the community college and the educational institutions, right? That can help connect you with a potential pipeline of candidates for these jobs as well. And that's something that's also been another very productive relationship that we've embarked on with the community college system as well. And born out of that, kind of breaking down those barriers with the Colorado Workforce Development Council.
One example of cross-agency collaboration that's in the report that I often raise is the California Prison to Employment Initiative, which is a partnership between the California Workforce Development Board and the California Department of Correction. And in addition to providing training that's aligned to in-demand jobs that the state has identified, the program helps to seamlessly connect people who are soon to be released from, soon to exit incarceration, to services after they do exit that incarceration. But in addition, having that partnership, other state agencies have been able to plug into that network and influence the trainings that are being offered, and even offer conditional job offers to people so that when they do leave incarceration, they have a job upon their exit. I flag that just to say, when we talked about engaging other stakeholders, we also think departments of correction are a major way to connect and prepare people for energy jobs. So I think I want to say thank you so much to Michelle and Carrie for adding your insights to today's discussion and for participating in the initiative. We've learned a lot from you and are so grateful for your time. I would also, I'll kick it back to Grace, who has some questions for the audience.
Great, thanks, Maya. And echoing that gratitude to Michelle and Carrie for joining us today and throughout the initiative, and to all the state participants. We're really so glad that you were able to participate and contribute so many helpful insights to our learnings and to the report, which I will definitely link to in our follow-up email. But let me pull up the slides one more time. There we go. And also want to welcome any questions from the audience. If you want to jump in, I saw one question. It looks like it was maybe partially addressed in the chat about the USER, the U.S. Energy and Employment Report. Carrie, feel free to jump in if you have more detail, but I do believe the Pennsylvania report was a separate, although similar.
Yeah, it was so we've been doing these reports for a couple of years, just sort of the energy employment report and a specific clean energy employment report, which wasn't really part of the federal report initially. And then we commissioned our own, basically using, turns out it was the same provider, the same folks who did that report for the most part. Then we decided we wanted to look at gaps, and the way we looked at gaps was a little different. Like, we were thinking, where are the training gaps, and are there enough trainings? And really, that wasn't the question, because, well, the question of that part is there's plenty of trainings out there. There's plenty of curriculum. There's people who can provide it for the most part. At least there were opportunities for people to get trained, but there weren't enough. It was really more about connecting with people. It's hard to find enough people to do the work. So one thing that we haven't really addressed as part of this is really, how do we make these jobs sound interesting to people? We've had a lot of those conversations with our weatherization trainers, our weatherization program. You can get a nice, easy, cushy job at a cash register, which wasn't cushy necessarily, but easier physically, for maybe $15 an hour, as opposed to crawling in, damp, dirty basements and dealing with, the things that you find in those basements for maybe not much, maybe less than that, maybe not much more than that. So how do you attract people to those kinds of jobs, weatherization jobs and some of the other jobs? Are they, I think we need to do some marketing, maybe collectively. Climate save the world, work in the weatherization program, be a climate hero, do solar installations, boy, energy efficiency, help your local friends and family. I don't know. I mean, I think that's another thing to think about too, that you probably use some help with.
Definitely.
That
No,
was-
that's a great point. And welcome any brainstorming or thoughts in the chat. I'd love to use the collective to sort of help think of those ideas for messaging. And feel free to keep adding questions, or if you'd like to raise your hand and come off mute, feel free to ask us any questions. But I did want to launch this Zoom poll just to get a sense for how other states are thinking about clean energy workforce issues. So for the first question, hopefully you all can see it. Thumbs up, you can? Okay, awesome. So has your office engaged with other state agencies and key stakeholders on clean energy workforce issues? Looks like mostly yeses, which is great to hear. And if you're willing to share, feel free to come off mute and elaborate and share some of the ways that you have collaborated or worked with your counterpart in the workforce agency. Leah, yeah, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Leah Wilkes. I am the Financial Programs Project Planner here at the Minnesota State Energy Office. We are just starting these conversations, and we have reached out to DEED and Dolly, the Department of Employment and Economic Development, and then Dolly here in Minnesota. And the suggestion was also about the regional workforce, but we're having a hard time. I mean, basically, it's almost the response was that we should go ahead and engage on our own energy workforce development issues. They can support us with data and any sort of resources around that, but that they don't really have, they don't have the bandwidth right now to really collaborate with us. And maybe we weren't discussing it in the right terms or something, but or we might need to reapproach it, but we're not finding that really like same willingness on cross agency. We do have a meeting with someone else over at DEED here, but like, were there challenges for both of these states when you first started of making those correct connections?
Sure. In our case, Leah, we worked through our policy office. So yeah, we had some relationships with some folks in the other agencies, or you have your relationships with people, but not necessarily the right people. And we approached some, and actually we don't. Well, I'll say this: we were able to connect to the right people because we had our policy office, which is like, at the executive office of the agency, reach out to their policy people and say, who are the right people to talk to? We would like to have a conversation. And so the policy office people were engaged at that level for the first couple conversations until we made those connections. Actually, it was even higher than that. It was a deputy secretary over at Labor and Industry was like interested and asked me questions I had no idea what the answers were about, well, how are you going to handle unions, and how are you going to handle, get these people trained? Like, she had all these questions, and I was like, wow, this is great. I'm talking to you. This is so helpful. So I think that's it. You got to go up and over. And I don't know, that worked for us.
I would say that for the folks that we collaborated with in this project, we've, had mixed success. I mean, some of us continue to be really good partners. Others, kind of went back to their, daily work, and they're very, very busy. This question of capacity is consistently an issue. And again, I just think that also speaks to Maya's initial comments of an MOU, right? Sort of like laying out the foundation for this relationship, despite, what capacity levels are at any given moment. But yeah, I mean, I would say that, yeah, our experience has been relatively positive in terms of that. So I don't know if I'd have any suggestions for getting around that other than kind of advocating at the leadership level for formalizing a relationship.
Great. Thanks, Michelle. Thanks, Carrie. Stephanie, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Stephanie Weisenbach from the Iowa Energy Office. And I've had some very early conversations with both our Iowa Workforce Development and Department of Education. Those have gone pretty well, but I think part of what's worked well about it is that we've had a very kind of specific, more specific examples of the types of workforce that are going to be in demand, in particular for one project I'm looking at right now. And I think that level of specificity has helped, them be helpful, I guess. We even kind of got to the level of the actual job NAICS codes that are associated with some of the work we anticipate, because that allows them to look in their database on available workforce per region and things along those lines. And also, kind of gives us something tangible to communicate with the community colleges about. So we're still very early in this process, but I think that some of those specifics have helped jumpstart the conversation.
Great. That's awesome advice. Thanks, Stephanie. And I do just want to go through the rest of these poll questions. Let's see. If I can get to the question 2. So out of these 4 different sort of areas to focus on, which of the following priorities would you be most interested in either pursuing or just learning more about? Okay. It looks like those last 2 are the most popular so far. Great. I know, hard to choose one. I probably should have made this a multiple choice question, but thanks for answering. All right, I think we've got a quorum or all of the above. All right, and then third question, would you be interested in having a follow-up conversation with NASEO and the Markle Foundation to discuss some of these priorities and strategies? And we're happy to follow up. I have both of our emails on the next slide. So if you are thinking about all of these issues or haven't thought about it and want to connect, we're more than happy to. And I'm sure Michelle and Carrie would also be happy to answer any questions. All right, and then last question, because I know we're just about at time. Would you be interested in a follow-up webinar with union leaders to discuss how state energy offices could potentially collaborate with local unions on the implementation of some of this federal funding? For some reason, that one is not launching for me. I don't know if you all can see it or not.
No, I was going to say it's not showing up.
Oh, I think I had to end the last one. Sorry about that. There we go. Okay, hopefully you can see it now. Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for your input on these questions. This has been really helpful and hopefully will lead to some more conversations. I know this is just an ongoing issue that cuts across a lot of your work, and we're really excited to see so many states thinking about this in new ways and collaborating with their counterparts in workforce agencies and education departments. So thank you so much for joining. And again, feel free to reach out if you have any questions or want to learn more. We'll be following up with an email with this recording, the slides, and links to the resource. So thank you all so much. Thanks to Michelle and Carrie for sharing your time with us. And thank you, Maya, for your partnership on this initiative.
Thanks for all your help as well.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely invaluable.
Thanks all. Have a great afternoon.
Bye-bye.